My name is Matt Leopold, and as Nick just mentioned, I work for Yoda One Games. I head up BD and marketing for our team. You guys may recognize us as mobile publishers. We've worked with a number of teams bringing their games into the West on the mobile side, the latest of which was Hasbro, Space Ape, and Backflip's game, Transformers. And we've also worked with a number of teams on the global side, games like Crossy Road and Rodeo Stampede. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about PC publishing, and more specifically, PC publishing, premium PC publishing in the China market. So currently as it stands, there are really only two platforms that we're focusing on for publishing PC games in the China market this time. Steam was really the first to break into it a few years ago, and WeGame is proving to be coming to the fore as the most competitive, viable competitor. That is not to say that there are not other platforms that may pop up in China in the near future. If the fragmentation of the Android market is any indication, there'll be a number of players that will emerge, and we've already heard some rumblings in the industry of who those are going to be. But for simplicity's sake and for the sake of this conversation, I'll be framing it around Steam and Tencent's WeGame platform. So first, let me throw some numbers at you. China is the fastest growing Steam market in the world, and it currently is the third largest market in the world in terms of players on Steam. As you can see, shortly after the mainstream of Steam use in China in 2015, it quickly snapped up about 4% of the market share there. And only 2 years later, this share has risen to about 12%. Well, this is a little outdated. It's now about 12% of the market. And 12% of the market in China is really only a drop in the bucket. There are about 300 million Chinese gamers out there, and only 12% of them are actually on Steam's platform as well. Looking closer to the expansion of the market, we see the amount of players increase by about 560% from a little over 5 million players to a little over 35 million players in the market. And like I said, with only a little over 10% of China's 300 million gamers on Steam in China, the amount of players in Steam is really only a drop in the bucket at this point. There's a lot of room for potential growth in the market. At the same time, we've seen an equally significant increase in the amount of games purchased per player, growing from around 3 games per Steamer queue to about 12 games. And in this way, we're also seeing a deepening of Chinese taste with games. When we combine these two numbers, we actually see the real growth of the market. And in these 2 years, we've seen it grow from about 16 million games in China to about 306 million games downloaded in the market. This is actually about an 1,800% growth in total market. But what really contributed to this sudden change? Well, the first was the introduction of popular games on Steam platform. And actually, Perfect World led the charge with this. They worked closely with the Chinese government to get Dota 2 launched in China and on local servers in the mainland. This actually opened up a huge opportunity for other developers, because now Chinese gamers who had previously never been exposed to Steam in the past, they were able to log on to Steam and see a whole swath of other new content that they never played before. After those gamers were introduced to the market, Steam got smart, and they started supporting Chinese payment systems. So Alipay, UnionPay, and WeChat Pay were all integrated into Steam to allow Chinese gamers who previously would not be able to consume on their platform. Chinese players, as you can probably understand, they don't have foreign credit cards or debit cards, so they needed a localized way to obtain this content. And then there was the recommended pricing feature that Steam offered. Steam started to support the RMB in 2014, and with it, they started adjusting prices in the region to accommodate the market and meet market demand. And then, of course, Chinese-based servers. This is very important for online games, obviously, that want to have their players interacting. So game development companies started using local server providers to get their game content into the region. And then last, it was really an increase in disposable income for Chinese players. Previously, they really didn't care about whether they paid a lot of money for content. They just wanted it free, they wanted it quick, and now there's actually a growing demand for higher quality content, as well as higher quality services that go with that content. But what does it really take to launch your game in the China market? And I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail throughout the talk. But the first is really a culturalized storefront. The second, ground-up in-game culturalization. The third, optimized pricing. Then you have to do local marketing, you have local live ops and customer support, then there's a government licensing process, and then proper distribution channels. So many people are under the impression that a game needs to be of a certain genre or a style of gameplay in order to sell in China. Well, this is simply not really the case anymore. MMOs, MMORPGs, and MOBA titles still reign king in the market, where PvP elements are key, online co-op is important, as well as local co-op play. But recently we've seen some other successes in the market. We got roguelikes like Binding of Isaac, Lost Castle, survival games like H1Z1, Don't Starve, sandbox games like Terraria and Minecraft, open world games like GTA, The Witcher. However, these games that I put up here, actually, they all share one thing, a couple things in common. So they're all from indie studios, they're all solid games, and they all sell incredibly well in the China market. Take Stardew Valley, for example, not streamable, not competitive, not multiplayer, and not one of the key genres that you really expect Chinese gamers to really go after. And yet it's been a huge hit in the China market and a huge sensation. But the game that I'll be framing this conversation around it fits into that similar story. Indie studio, solid game, sells well in China already. But I'll frame it around Hand of Fate. So this is by Defiant Development, Australia, out of Brisbane, Australia. We worked with this team for a number of years on the mobile side through games like Ski Safari and Ski Safari 2. And they've been pushing us for years to get into PC publishing. And it was really only up until about 2 years ago when we started actually taking the industry seriously. And we started seeing the stars align in terms of premium PC publishing. So what perfect partner to jump in with than with one that we've worked with for a while. So great game aside, Hand of Fate was struggling in the China market. And one of the best ways to push your game in China is obviously through the storefront. And that's the first thing that we tackled from the get-go. This is the first thing that players will see when they're thinking about your game or whether or not to buy it. And you want to make sure that you have a culturalized experience to go with pitching your game. So the first was logo creation. So making a logo that Chinese players can identify and really say properly is the first thing, really. Then you want to do marketing assets, your headers, your capsules, marketing description about the game. You want that all culturalized and not just translated from whatever you have on the local side, the Western side. And then you want Chinese trailers. Another one of the essentials is not just localizing the content, but really culturalizing. And there is a differentiation, the game for Chinese. It's essential to work with someone who really understands both the game and the context and really the player base that they're tackling. Not to really just work out of an Excel spreadsheet to directly translate the game. For Hand of Fate, we actually had our game designers rewrite a lot of the content based on culturalized phrases that they came up with while playing through the game that felt more natural and more Chinese to them. We also redid a lot of the card art, replacing it with Chinese visuals in terms of the characters, in terms of the characters on the cards. So really doing a full overhaul of the content. Simply having Chinese in there is a minimum. It allows you to check the box off for supporting Chinese, but it's really kind of only the tip of the iceberg in terms of when you're optimizing your content. And we found that all this really boosts reviews and gaming and overall gaming rating significantly. And we actually, with Hand of Fate, we actually went one step further, and it really made sense for this game. But we also did a localized voiceover. We did a localized voiceover for the game, and with this you'll see a bunch of card art that we redid. But this actually allowed players to really get into the experience more so than if you just kind of had a dialogue translated there. I'm not going to say that voiceover is the best for every game. In China, actually, a lot of Chinese players will prefer to not have the game voiceover, but since the guy's face is actually covered and most of the content that we voiced over was by that guy, it actually made a lot more sense to do this to match up with player expectations. But in general, it's not always a great thing to do voiceovers, but really you have to pick your battles with that. But it did improve the gaming rater significantly once we added that into the game. So then we go into the pricing. And so what I always talk to developers when I'm discussing with developers about the Western side, I always tell them to keep in mind the China side, because when you're pricing your game, you're going to want to do it in a way that's not going to hurt your sales. And with China, you're looking at a 50% cut in what you're pricing your game. So say you have a $20 game in the West, you're looking at a $10 game, plus all the discounts, sales, and et cetera. You're looking at a much lower price game. And then for other platforms, and I'll go into a little bit later, but like WeGame, they'll actually require you to lower your price even further. So in the effort to target a bigger mass market, you're also lowering your price significantly. And we face very similar things on the mobile side with IAP and stuff like that. But it is really key to keep this in mind because you don't want your game to be priced too low on the Western side so that when you're looking at China, you're really looking at pennies when you're doing Steam sales and stuff like that with your local partner. The pricing strategy is also a way to deter people from downloading cracked builds and fake builds of the game. Because, I mean, making it an affordable price that Chinese players are more in tune to will actually promote downloading the proper build of the game. And so on the marketing side, it's no surprise. We reached out to many PC marketing and gaming websites. It's very similar to what it looks like in the West. There are some under the table deals, hand-to-hand deals that are involved. But in general, it's very similar to what you're looking at in the West. But it's also, and I want to emphasize this a little bit more, it's also very important to build up your game's community on social media. To the left, you'll see Tieba, which is kind of like the China Reddit. And you'll see on those three icons, that's Weibo, QQ, and WeChat, the three main social channels to promote anything in China. And we see everything from customer service inquiries, fan praises, game guides, bugs. We also promote a lot of update content. We post contests. We interact with the community all through our Chinese social media accounts for these games. And operating these social media accounts, media channels, really also shows your players that you actually care about the Chinese player base, which a lot of developers out there are not really paying attention to at this time. And similar to the West also is using local influencers. And it's a little hairier in the China market. The influencer marketing in China is massive. It has about 375 million registered streamers right now. And it's really about choosing which ones are really going to target your product. Similar to what you discussed in the West, it's even kind of a little bit hairier in China where we work with partners from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, from mainland, all have different user bases, different influencer networks. And what we've actually found recently is instead of going for a couple of the big guys, we'll go for maybe one big guy, and then we'll mine with a bunch of smaller influencers. And we found that market penetration is much greater and creates a much bigger brand awareness and game awareness as you go to launch and through with updates as well. And of course, the best way to drive visibility when you're doing a relaunch or launching your game in China and in global markets is to go for your Steam store feature spots. Valve has been pushing the China market hard for the last several months and is really excited to see new content. So reach out to your Steam rep early with the pitch, and they're more than likely to respond positively if you're looking to update it with content like Chinese content. Another marketing technique that we used were pre-sales events with WeGame. And pre-sales is not something that's new to the China market, but we did use this quite successfully to promote the game when we were launching on WeGame. And keep in mind, our WeGame launch of the title came after we relaunched on Steam, and that also has to do with the government review process. But I did want to put this slide in here because using stretch goals to boost awareness really helped get the word out there in a sea of games that is hard to penetrate. We also did a lot of contests for players. We ran a lot of we produced a lot of merchandising. Again, China is very cheap to do merchandising, so we ran a bunch of contests with official gaming content that Chinese players would get really excited about. And we also, again, saw a significant hype boost with those types of events. And then it's also supporting your player base. And again, this is also done through social media channels. We also do it through Steam as well and through other channels through WeGame. But it's really to keep your players up to date. It's to monitor player feedback, manage your social media accounts and forums, and you really will find and you'll receive many more positive reviews for your game. And we got a huge boost in overall rating once we relaunched on Steam. And then, well, this is what it really looked like. After we relaunched on Steam, we saw a 118% increase in China revenue. which is now about like 41% of the total revenue for the game. And its share of players in China actually increased to about 50% within the first few months of launch. But it doesn't really stop there. So this past several months, we started seeing a lot of error messages pop up in China for players trying to access Steam from the mainland. We saw it on Weibo, we saw it on WeChat, we saw all these posts from frustrated gamers saying they couldn't access the content that they paid for. So in an effort to diversify risk and ensure that we're targeting the largest player base in the world, we sought out other platforms. And the biggest platform out there right now is Tencent's WeGame platform. And that's what I'm going to focus on. There are some rumors that other players are going into the platform space. They're not necessarily exactly as big as Tencent right now, but the reasons why you really want to get out onto Tencent and other local platforms is really because they're going to offer cheaper prices, making it more competitive for games reaching their player bases. You also have integrations with key social networks within WeGame itself, as well as integration with popular streaming sites, also built in directly into WeGame. So here's, this is one of the pricing ones, but you see social media within the game, and then you have integration with actually this is in the WeGame platform, and it's also a legal alternative to Steam in China. It boasts 30 million plus daily active users in China right now. And again, this is still early days for the platform and for the premium side of the industry in China. WeGame currently only has about 40 to 50 titles on its platform, and only about a dozen of those games are from foreign developers. And they're games that Tencent, for the most part, Tencent is pushing. We have about 3 games on WeGame's platform right now. And really, the hiccup to get onto Tencent's platform is the government review process. And it's really hard to get through. It takes several months. It takes a lot of resources. And Tencent has actually sought out other partners within the industry, like ourselves, to help get other games onto their platform as well when they can't take up the slack. And I'll kind of go through this briefly, but the goal is really to get your game approved in the China market. And this is a huge hassle and impossible for a lot of titles. But I'll go through it from a bigger picture standpoint here. But I mean, this is what you guys may recognize on the mobile side is what you saw for China. And it kind of explains the deal. You needed a licensing number basically to launch your game in China. Right now, it's not enforced on iOS. It's not forced on Steam right now. But facing very similar factors in the industry with the government. So again, to get through this, go through government licensing. And the first step is really obtaining your copyright registration for your game in China. And I'm going to go through these steps pretty quickly because they're really boring. And I can point you in the direction of where to find more details on. But first is obtaining your copyright registration. And you apply through the National Copyright Association of China to get this. And it's used for ensuring that the publisher is licensed to launch the game in China. And it curbs, this is early remnants of the early piracy policies that existed in the government process. And it was a way to ensure that publishers weren't just throwing random IP up onto the different channels. This actually kind of kept that in check for a little bit. The second is really obtaining registration approval for your game with the China's Ministry of Culture. And this is mandatory for launch. It's not extremely labor intensive, but it's more of a self-government mechanic that reminds publishers and developers that they are responsible for upholding certain rules that go with publishing your content in China. You also need a proof of local business, another little hurdle, a partnership agreement with your local publishing partner, as well as various declarations that you are not going against anything that is culturally sensitive that China would deem horrifying or anything. And the third and the most painful step is getting your game through SAPRIFT. And this latest and most comprehensive addition to the latest and most comprehensive addition to the regulatory process, where you'll need the above two, the first 2 requirements, as well as a slew of additional requirements that I'll save you guys from at this time. But basically, it's through the, I think it's State Association for Press, Publication, Radio, and I don't know, so I wrote it down somewhere. The State Administration of Press, Publication, Radio, Film, and Television. It's a mouthful, but basically it controls all the content that's going out into China in any of those different channels. And this process, It takes anywhere from 3 months to 5 months, 6 months, depending on the game. The fastest we've been able to get through it was about 3.5 months. And then on the PC side, on the fastest, it's been about 4 months. And we've hit a lot of roadblocks in the past with this. I'll go into a couple of examples. But the goal is to really get this to put into your game. And it basically says that you've complied with all these ridiculous requirements, and your game is approved for government for publishing in China. But like I said, it's not really over once you get through the first steps. And the first time we kind of encountered this, well, not the first time, but there are many aspects of your game that will cause the game to fail the government review, and some may not be what you would think. We worked with Earthwork Games, Australia-based studio, on a game called Forts. It's a physics-based RTS that pitches the USA, Russia, and China against one another in an all-out war for oil. So depoliticizing Forts for government review meant implementing fundamental changes to both the game's storyline and the game's art. So you can see that we did a pretty big overhaul on the map here. We changed up a lot of the physical attributes that were denoting certain cultures. I think they originally had Chinese hats in there too. Not a good thing for Chinese government. Yeah, so I mean, it was all, we did this all on our side though, making sure that we were complying with all government regulations, and eventually we got it through review. We also had to do something similar with Hand of Fate, where I don't know how many people are familiar with Hand of Fate, but there are skeletons all over Hand of Fate. It's one of the 4 main races in the game. We actually had to go through the whole game and scrub all those skeletons and turn them into wood golems. And this apparently worked for China. We had to retexture, recolor, and reclothe a lot of these characters. And also on the card art, if you saw in the trailer, we actually had to do all the card art too, because there were skulls, bones, all that stuff. And apparently skeletons and similar things like that are deemed horrifying by Chinese government. So they really force you to get rid of them really quickly when in the review process. But it is important to make these content changes, because you really do want your game out there on other Chinese platforms. I mean, Steam is great, and they're going to be doing great in the future. They will push through eventually this hurdle they're hitting with the China market, but it opens up a lot of the market to these other players that will be coming out there. Like I said, Tencent's the first one that we've seen as a viable competitor, but the other ones are coming out there soon. And we'll maintain a very neutral stance, similar to what we do on the Android publishing side, where we'll work with our partners differently depending on launches and games. But yeah. So what are really the key takeaways? Chinese market is obviously growing fast, and it's something to keep in mind right now while you're developing the game. You want to invest in your translations throughout the game, both through storefront, through your in-game dialogue, through your marketing resources and stuff like that. You're going to want to price your game appropriately using Steam suggestion, but also keeping in mind that when you price your game in the West, you should also consider what's going to have an effect in the East. And then don't get lazy on marketing. You should use local channels. You should use a partner that knows the local market. It's similar to other Asian markets. You really have to go with a local partner to really get on the ground marketing and get some traction there. And social media accounts are key. If there's one thing that you do to do marketing on your own, set up a Weibo account, set up a WeChat account, get your game out there on those channels, and make sure that you're interacting with the player community on those channels. It honestly has a huge uptick with overall ratings. And then getting government approval for proper distribution in China. While you can check the box for China on Steam, it may not be the biggest market you're looking for. Obviously, like I said, there's 12% of China's user base on Steam right now. There are many more other players out there to target, and that's kind of the goal with these next couple months with the China market. And I think that's it.